You say when?
It's rolling.
It's rolling, okay. Oh yeah, the opening scene at the station.
Well, the film, as you see, begins on the Gare d'Austerlitz.
This is Oya Kodar.
I'm very bad at chronology. I don't remember exactly when this thing was shot, but talking about Magic Trick, the Gare station, it was shot in Paris on La Gare d'Austerlitz. It's a wonderful station, all decorated in Art Nouveau and so on. It's really, it gives you, it has something very romantic. When you get to that station, of course, the trains are now very new and sophisticated, so maybe it takes a little bit of poetry away. But just looking at that station and its roofs and all those decorations cast in iron, you think that if you get in one of those trains, you are going to go to a most marvelous destination. And in a certain sense, it's symbolic, because I think that this film really takes people to a wonderful destination. It takes you to a world of Orson Welles, because this film is much more really than what you see. It's not only magic, it's not only about art, it's not only about fakers, it's about Orson. And a lot of this film is Orson's memory of his childhood. When you see a little boy with a coin that appears and disappears, it is really Orson himself when he was a child. His father took him once when he was about 5 or 6, just as this little boy is. By the way, this little boy is my nephew, son of my sister, who also worked on the film. Actually, all my family was engaged in this film, even my dogs. His father took him to see Houdini. And Houdini did something like he did to my nephew Sasha. And Orson was enchanted forever. And actually, he said to me once, as the answer to my question, one day we are all going to die. When you die, Orson, what would you like to have on your tombstone as an epitaph? And he said, without thinking too long, here lies the greatest magician.
Rich, too. It's a good story about it.
Do you want to tell it?
We'll come to that one later. Now it's time for an introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, by way of introduction, this is a film about trickery and fraud, about lies.
My name is Gary Graver, and I was the cinematographer on F for Fake. I was called in to work on this by Orson after he had taken over a documentary film based on Elmire de Horry, so work set out. Then Clifford Irving wrote a book about Howard Hughes, which was a fake. So we got another fake in there. And then Howard Hughes exposed Clifford Irving. So we really have a movie about a fake, about a fake, about a fake. It goes on. F for Fake sort of invented itself, as Orson would discover every day from the newspaper. Something different was happening with Howard Hughes and Irving. And that just grew and grew. It's like getting to play a game or something, editing-wise, you know, getting to play with all this footage and make something go from one story to the other and back to this, and oh, well, here and this and that. It made it very lively. See, at the editing table, he was discovering the film as we went along, and that dictated the making of the picture.
I am not a professional actor.
He's a leading actor in this movie.
Regarding the title, yes, sometimes it's called fake, sometimes it's not called anything, it's just a question mark. Sometimes it's called F for Fake, and the film, through the shooting and the clapboard, it has always had F for Fake. But I think when we discussed what we should really put on the screen, Orson wanted it to be, because it was all magic and it was all a lie. He did not want to, he felt that he's going to pinpoint it down if he gives it a title. He, as film is kind of visual essay and it's a fluid, he was afraid that he's going to put it into a frame. He wanted to let it kind of loose And I think he was right, and I was, as always, happy with his decisions, and I didn't care that it's not called F for Fake, which I wanted it to be. Although on the posters, of course, you must put something. People cannot say we are going to look at, well, maybe they can say we are going to look at the question mark. But F for Fake sound nice, and call it whatever you want, because the film is, in a certain sense, I think that everybody who looks at the film has a right and should, in his mind, give to the film its own title. The girl watching sequence is really Orson watching the girl. Although I wrote this little script, I wrote this about 3 or 4 years before I met Orson. And it was, I was probably one of the first feminists in Croatia, with this script, I mean. Because it was, I was going to talk about the situation in my country regarding the position of women. So this would have been also a political thing. It wouldn't have been just a girl watching and ha ha ha, there is a nice piece of, I don't want to say the word moving around, you know. When I met Orson, I told him about, you know, when you are young and you are kind of arrogant, you think that you know everything and you dare to do anything. So him being a great, or one of the greatest movie directors to me, who was young, and at that time I was pretty, I must say, without false modesty, and you are a little bit full of yourself, and you can think that with a nice body and beautiful face, shiny eyes of youth, you can do anything you want. So why not, Orson Welles? You know, well, you are doing the film, but I also wrote the script. At that time, I was a student of the School of Beautiful Arts. And he said, well, I would like to read your script, but more than that, I'm very interested in seeing what you do in the School of Beautiful Arts. So I said, I'm in the Department of Sculptures, and I will bring you some things so you can see. So I took him to the school. On one Sunday, the guard let me in, and he saw my work. Actually, I was the only woman accepted in the school at that time to be a sculptor. And he said, well, Miss Palinkash, because that was my family name, now that I saw what you do, I'm going to show you tomorrow what I do. And next day, he sent his driver to pick me up, to drive me to the big, it's a kind of place where we have, how would you say that? I don't even know the word in English, foire, where they have the big exhibit of industry and things like that. And he used that for his film. He was filming the trial there. So the driver comes, picks me up, takes me to the exhibit place. He waits for me at the gates. A lot of extras, technicians, everybody's there. You can imagine nobody can imagine my embarrassment. I was young, I was in a communist country. I come out of the car, there comes that big American director, capitalist. They think loaded with money. Helps me get out of the car, kiss my hand. My God, when he kissed my hand, I wanted to drop all the way through the earth to China, you know. People looked at me in a slight consternation, and I would say even with the antipathy. And I don't think I should exaggerate if I say that this slight animosity of that thing that he did by kissing my hand, and later, much later, me accepting him as my friend and everything else, I think they never forgave me. In my country, I don't think they forgave me for that.
Trickery in this film about trickery will repeat our promise in writing. The girl watching was evidence of how much of all this was filmed in blissful ignorance of the facts about some of the various characters who found their way in front of our cameras.
Clifford Irving told the story.
Orson was so devoted to Oya. He wanted to include her in everything, and she was basically a co-writer with Orson on F for Fake and The Other Side of the Wind and the other projects, because not only were they partners in life, but they were partners as artists.
For instance, that the author of Fake, a book about a faker, was himself a faker and the author of a fake. To end all...
Much later, when I was already together with Orson, he asked me if I would be willing to let him use part of the Girl Watching. And I was very, very pleased and very happy, because I always had a little doubt that when he saw my doing my sculpting and my sculptures, and when he read that script, I gave it to someone to translate it, because at that time I didn't speak English at all. I thought when he said it's very good that he was just trying to seduce me, which he was, but he was too honest. He was an honest man, and I saw later that he was not using this as a tool to get me. So I said, of course, take the Girl Watching and let's put it in Francoise and your film. And this is how the thing got into the film.
Life magazine calls it where restless souls may find each other. The restless souls being, I guess, Cliff Irving over there and Elmire. Coincidence number one, that these two world leaders in fakery operated quite separately on the same tiny island.
About Elmire, I think I can safely say, but he was one of the most charming persons I ever met. He was very badly treated by people for whom he made those forgeries. And I believe that even the villa in Ibiza, when you see him around the pool, receiving the guests, very charming and relaxed, it was, in a certain sense, all a facade. He was a poor man. And I think he was even... The little hints when I talked with him, he had an enormous sadness in those big, liquid black, those eyes. It's very strange, you know, when you think of art, that some people can imitate everything and are not capable of doing themselves something. But then, I don't know, I am asking even people who are looking at the film, isn't the capability of imitation also some kind of art? Because many other people cannot do that. Maybe he doesn't come up with an original idea, but I don't know. I wish I could talk to people who are looking at the film and ask them, because it was a question that puzzled me through the years, this question. Is imitation also a sort of art? He was going to give me a present. Elmire was going to give me a present. And he said, come tomorrow. We were in San Sebastian. And he said, you know, I have for you a couple of nice, being Hungarians both, vertices that you're just going to adore. And I said, jokingly, are they real? And he said, they are, my dear, as real as many other vertices in museums all over the world. So I wait for the vertices. He comes for dinner, little distressed. And he said, my dear, I cannot give you those vertices. And I said, what happened, Elmire? I don't care, you know? I don't care. Really. Because I couldn't sell them, everybody would know, you know. I would have liked to have them as a souvenir of you, but everybody would know that I met you and they probably are fakes, and I wouldn't play with such a thing. He said, my dear, you could have sold them. You know, experts are idiots. I said, well, yes, but still. Anyway, what happened, Elmire? I am not allowed, he said to me. And I believe it was it was through those French crooks. I forgot their names, and I don't want even I knew the names, mention their names. I think that there must have been some inventory. I think they kept close account what he was doing, and he was not capable of or able or permitted to sell any of those things that he painted or even to give a present. Everything was for, quote, the market.
Of being murdered. This takes us into murky waters where the lawyers tell us we'd be rash to go fishing. In Fake, there's just a hint or two about this violence and danger, as a result of which Irving, on top of all his other troubles, is being sued for $55 million worth of slander. Interesting question. Is Clifford Irving being...
But this is a fascinating story about Elmire. Nicest guy. And after this movie, he had another conviction of art forgery, and he was about to go back to prison. And he was getting older, and rather than face the lockup, he committed suicide. Now you see, there's a shot of Orson, who shot this in Spain. He took the material that he had. Now this is shot separately from this. We would go out and shoot stuff with Orson to cut into existing footage. It's sort of the host, master ceremonies, presiding over the whole situation.
Elmire, cries a French newspaper, has sold his soul to the devil.
There's an example of a cut so quick that the negative cutters couldn't find edge numbers. Before MTV, there's a lot of quick cuts in here. Orson loved to shoot and he loved to edit. And he worked 7 days a week, which I didn't realize when I signed on.
Because there's always a market for it.
How much is that drawing worth in the market today?
Probably around $8,000 to $10,000.
To my knowledge, he has never made a mistake when identifying a painting.
What period is that, Matisse?
36.
I met Orson first alone, and then after that, my first meeting with Oya was at a dinner that Orson cooked, a fondue at his house. Once we got started shooting The Other Side of the Wind, and he found he really trusted me, and myself and Oya and Orson were like the three, we were the team. And I traveled everywhere with them, hotels, and lived at their house, and we ate almost every meal together. As I said, I worked with him for 15 years.
Transform himself before our very eyes into a superstar.
Francois, you know, we talk about your shirt, Rashida. It was indecently ugly. I can assure you.
In this film, Orson was using many people who were not professionals. And he loved to work with a very small crew, which he would call skeleton crew. Orson hated to have a big crew and hated to see someone not doing something during the shooting. So that if I was not in front of the screen, I was maybe a focus puller. If I was not a focus puller, maybe at that moment I was translating something because I spoke Italian and French. If I wasn't doing that, maybe I was cooking lunch for the crew. You see, everybody was doing everything. I remember when we were shooting The Other Side of the Wind, that a lady by the name of a dear friend of mine, Dominique Antoine, a French lady, she was holding a water hose, garden water hose, to make rain on the car to shoot the love sequence with me and the boy in the car in this film. To cut it short, I'll tell you this in one sentence. This is Orson talking. I hate, while I shoot, to see someone behind my back nose-picking.
A word about that wig she wore in the Swiss bank. There hasn't been a breath about funny passports or phony signatures, and here's Edith telling Clifford Irving that she can't believe Elmire had anything to do with fakery.
Therefore, I never could think or will even think now is that he sat down and did.
The only time I ever worked on a film set in over 200 movies where everyone was quiet, was working with Orson Welles. Orson started in the morning talking and directing and giving us orders, what he wanted. And he talked, it was a monologue all day long. If we wanted to say something, we had to go up to him. We couldn't have private conversations because he did not want to be interrupted. We'd have to go off the set and talk. And Orson said from the beginning, he told me, filmmaking is not a democracy. I am the director. But if you had a suggestion, and he painted himself into a corner, which he often did, and I think he enjoyed it, trying to get himself into a predicament or a situation and then try to see how he'd get out of that. He was good at it. Then he'd take the suggestion or not. He did not like to, as he said, walk down memory lane. So it was hard to get him to talk about his old movies. He wanted to do the new movie. He did not want to talk about movies unless he came up with it. He'd say, oh, we only used one light in that shot in Citizen Kane. So if he'd come up with it, then he'd talk and tell lots of stories. And, of course, one of the great evenings I had was sitting up all night long listening to Orson and John Huston talk. I wish I'd had a tape recorder. It was quite something, because they were great friends working together, and finally ended up working together on the picture I shot called The Other Side of the Wind, which we're negotiating to finish after wrapping 30 years ago.
Does it say something for this age of ours that he could only make it big by fakery?
Je crois.
That a hoax has made him the most famous writer in the world?
La grande surprise.
Cliff Irving's Caper may well be the hoax of the century, but really this is not, you know, in any way the century of the hoax. We hanky-panky men have always been with you.
That's a fact.
What's new? Are they...
This print looks pretty good here. Now, see, I know what bothers me is the stuff I'm photographing on the Moviola screen is a work print, and it's got dirt and dust on it and everything. But this is the best print I've seen.
All the world loves to see.
I shot a lot of stuff on this flatbed Moviola. You'll see like this, you see. And a lot of times the film stock was not fast enough, the Kodak stock, because the Moviola, no matter what machine it was, Orson called it a Moviola. The flatbed, I'll call it, editing. I didn't have enough light, so I had to push the film.
Any of them recognize which one is which?
And if the lawyers would just let us, we could name you one highly respected museum which boasts of an important collection of post-impressionists, every single one of which was painted by Elmire.
All this stuff with Orson sitting at his flatbed editing machine were all shot at the studio, which was a big, very large room in his house, which we converted into a studio. So we would take all this footage, put it on the Moviola, and then rephotograph it with Orson watching it. Basically, I did everything with him talking, and then he'd leave me alone and I'd shoot the stuff on them, you know, going through the machine.
And that you expose their crookedness, their evilness, and viciousness.
I went around to the art galleries, not with my book, but with...
The way we worked was that I was responsible for everything technical. Orson would say what he wanted to do, etc. And he would usually set the lights and the setups and, you know, what he wanted and everything, what kind of shots he wanted, etc. My job, really, when I started with him, was to make sure that everything came through the lab all right. And technically, yeah, you can do it, Orson, it's fine, or that's a problem or whatever. So he relied upon me for that aspect.
And the background is very badly done and the signature isn't right. In the next gallery, I would show them this Modigliani in the catalog and say, that's a genuine Modigliani.
Possibly, yes.
And they would look at it and say, well, yes, you can see it's one of his finest Modiglianis. It's a portrait of Mademoiselle Eboutin, and we know it very well, and it's reproduced everywhere. After that, I must say I lost my faith in the concept of expertise.
I don't feel bad for Modigliani. I feel good for me.
I first met Orson when I was just starting out as a cameraman. I'd only been shooting a couple of years, and I just admired him so much in his films. And I wished there was some way I could help, that I wanted to see more Orson Welles movies. There weren't enough. So I made a blind call to him from Schwab's drugstore in Hollywood to the Beverly Hills Hotel. I'd read in Variety that he was in town. I only picked the one hotel. I just guessed he'd be there. And he was, and I called him up and I asked the operator for Orson Welles. And she put me right through, and Orson said, hello? I said, oh my God. I said, my name is Gary Graver. I'm an American cameraman, and I'd like to work with you. And he said, I can't talk to you right now. He said, I've got to go to New York, and I'm too busy. And I'm going to give you your phone number. So I gave him my phone number. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. And then I went home, and now pulling in my driveway in my garage, the phone was ringing upstairs. I ran up and answered. It was Orson. He said, Gary, get over to the Beverly Hills Hotel right away. I've got to talk to you. So I went over and met him and talked to him, and he said, you're the second cameraman who's ever called me up. Only the second one, and said they wanted to work with me. And the first was Greg Toland on Citizen Kane. So he said, I've been wanting to come back to Hollywood and make a movie, and I've got an idea. And I said, okay. And so he went to New York and he made a movie. He came back, we made some tests, and then we started at the end of 1970 with Peter Bogdanovich and a few other people making The Other Side of the Wind.
Till the devil whispered behind the leaves. It's pretty, but is it art?
The making of the film itself started really in Paris in the studio Ante Gore, where Orson was editing different things. I'm not going to say only The Other Side of the Wind, but he was editing a little bit of Don Quixote. He was working on some things for the Magic. He was always doing many things at once. And François Reichenbach, who was a French documentary director, and I think with his brother, the owner of an art gallery. And François one day came to our editing room and asked him if he would be willing to narrate his documentary that he made on Elmire de Hori. So Orson said, well, why not? Orson was very practical. That's why I always say that Orson was Don Quixote and Sancho Panza in one combined. And as Sancho Panza woke up in him, and Sancho Panza said, yes, François, show me what is it. So François projected the film for him. And he looked at it once, and then later I said, what do you think? He said, it's quite interesting. I will ask François to give me one more projection. And he looked at it for a second time, and I didn't question why. I knew, because he loved to talk and tell me things, I knew he's going to tell me eventually why he wants to see it for a second time. And he said, you know, Oya, first of all, I cannot tell this text that is given me by François, because without being pretentious, whatever I say, people think it's my own opinion. And I don't think anything like this text is. So I probably am going, not probably, but if I do the job, I'm going to rewrite the complete thing. But there is something else. I really would like to be able to make this film. And I'm going to talk to François and see if he would be willing to share the credit or something. And François was, to my surprise, because, you know, he would have made a film, have a narration by Orson Welles, but he was absolutely enchanted. And he said, absolutely, do anything you want, wonderful. So Orson stopped editing of The Other Side of the Wind, and we engaged and we started doing The F for Fake.
Hughes denied the existence of Irving.
No, I never saw
Don't believe a word of it, said Irving. And believe it or not, almost nobody did. Why, they were partners, Hughes and Irving.
Orson drew this of Hughes. This is all Orson drawing and signing Elmire. He painted all of his life. I've got some sketches he's given me. He had a strong connection to this subject. And he loved art, and he knew a lot about it. Of course, Orson knew a lot about everything. He was just a brilliant guy, and that's one thing that I was attracted to because he was a true artist, and I think one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, who was not allowed to continue. I mean, as far as raising money for projects, he never had a really big hit movie or anything. So he was never really one that the studios would trust. And because he was smarter than anybody else, too. And they didn't like that.
Very carefully wrapped package. Howard Hughes in his nocturnal wanderings never once paused there, but it was always ready.
This bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel is the bungalow where I met Orson. That's the actual place where he was living at the time.
A ham sandwich.
How can we believe that is true?
Francois is referring, of course, to Elmire. But about Hughes, well, who could blame Cliff Irving for believing that Hughes himself wanted us to believe almost anything? Look where we are now. When the old Hollywood swinger turned hermit, this is the hermitage he picked. His hideaway, his desert retreat. The desert had retreated first, of course, to make room for the slot machines and the crap tables. Then came Hughes.
There is Francois Reichenbach who asks Orson in a film about Oya. And Orson said, I'm going to tell the story of Oya a little later. And he also says, in the next hour, I'm going to tell the truth and nothing is going to be the lie, and so on and so on. But it was very difficult to tell the truth about any of us, because I think even in a real life, we are not exactly what people thought we are. Orson was many, many things that nobody knows. He even to me, he left his rosebud. And I knew him for 20 years. I was not what people thought I am, and I was not what people thought I'm in the film. And even in the film, I am 2 or 3 persons. Clifford Irving was not in his life exactly what he was. And in the film, again, he was something else. I don't know about Howard Hughes, but I think being crazy as he was, he also wasn't what he really was. And I don't know, maybe even to people who looks at this film, maybe they can sit in front of the mirror and look at themselves and really think who they are, because they also must, I'm not talking about double personality, but they, everybody of us has 2 or 3 minimum persons, because sometimes we at least I can see it in my friends, we surprise ourselves many times. One says, who would have thought that he or she would have done that? Why are people surprised at all at some things that people do? It's a ridiculous statement, and this film goes absolutely against this sentence, who would have said. It's normal, this is what life is, and this is what people are, and this is how it goes.
Howard Hughes.
I only wish I was still in the movie business.
Well, now he's on television, and a committee of journalists are interviewing his voice.
I don't remember any scripts as wild or as stretching of the imagination as this yarn has turned out to be.
Now remember how this went. Irving announced that Hughes had decided that Irving was just the writer he could trust, not only with his book, but with the money for it, and this involved an advance of some $750,000, and he had notes, memos, and manuscripts, and what he claimed was Hughes...
When Orson talked about Picasso, in the Picasso sequence, he says that Picasso is in Toussaint, and that a big rage, like a Hurricane Ethel, whatever those hurricanes are called, came out of Toussaint. Toussaint is an invented name. There might be a town in France that it's called Toussaint, but I don't think it exists. So this is a pure invention. Actually, the whole film was shot in Split in Croatia, in Rome, in Aurevilliers, where we had a house, in Houdan, which is a little town between Aurevilliers and Chartres. Was shot in Chartres. A little part of it was shot on the stage in Museum of Modern Arts in Los Angeles. God knows. I mean, it's very hard when somebody, even after all those years, but even if it was fresher in my memory, if you ask me when or where something was shot, it's not even a question that I'm getting old and forgetful. But the fact is that Orson was always shooting something else while he was shooting something else. So that he would use the material that was shot 5 years ago and put it today, and the stuff that he was shooting today he would keep because he was dreaming of a project and he knew that one day this little sequence is going to fit perfectly in something that he's going to do in the future. So the answer is it's very hard. You know, he was shooting always, everything and everywhere.
Wrapped in 15 years again.
All the tales he tells now are things that he has built up in his imagination over the years and come to believe as true.
The tale is as old as the Eden tree and new as...
Now, the sequence with Orson behind those glass bubbles, we were driving on the left bank in Paris, and I was driving, and Orson said to pull the car over. And he saw this shop, and we'd just been somewhere. Anyway, we always had the cameras and recorder and lights with us. Almost everywhere we went, we had it in the car. And because he owned the camera, see right there, that bubble. Well, we stopped and pulled over, and Orson went in, talked to the owner, and then he came back out and said, we're going to shoot something in here. I had no idea we were going to shoot. And there it is. He would see things and incorporate it. And he could very much do it with this film because there's no story. The script is what was happening every day.
I think Elmer's problem for years...
I've never worked this way since, where we actually are shooting and editing at the same time. So Orson would say, I wish I had this shot. Well, we just go make it. I did not have a focus puller, so some shots of Orson and Oya walking around, I had to put a little string on the lens. And I'd pull that string down and attach a little toothpick to stop the focus. So I was my own focus puller. So I had to invent and find out ways to do things to accommodate not having an assistant. But luckily, a lot of it was just Orson standing, hitting his marks, or stepping into it, stepping away, where I could keep everything in focus.
Rarity. The chief cause and encouragement of fakery and phoniness in everything, even what we're given to eat. An awful lot of forgeries committed these days in the kitchen.
Oh, yeah?
Seafood isn't phony in here, thank God. You can take the word of an expert. 3 friends from the old days who used to eat here.
This is a restaurant that we ate at a lot, one of Orson's favorites in Paris, called La Méditerranée. And German TV wanted to do an interview with Orson. And Orson said, okay, I'll give you an interview. But once you're finished with me, I want you to leave your light set up because I want to shoot something. And I was standing outside with the camera and the Nagra around my shoulder and everything and all this equipment. And then the minute he was done with the German interview, he signaled for me to come in, and I set up, and we filmed the sequence at the table. And he took that opportunity every chance he could. If someone wanted to do an interview or something, or if he went to make a movie, he had in his contract that he could take an editing machine with him and they'd pay for it. So he would act during the day and edit at night. He never wanted to be inactive.
That nice little Lautrec. I told him it was a very nice little Vertish. I'll take the Lautrec, he said. And if you happen to find any more, bring them in.
He said, would you sell it? I said, well, delighted. And I said, I can sell something absolutely unexpectedly for quite great deal of money in a time when I was unable, but absolutely unable, to sell any of my paintings.
How could you blame me? I had no money in my pocket. No.
There's Orson's favorite table. We always sat, all of us. He loved to take everybody to a meal and tell his stories. He's very entertaining, of course. Of course, I had so many meals that, and different people, I would hear the same stories over and over again, so I know them. F for Fake, along with filming Othello, which is a documentary we did for German television, are as close as you're going to see Orson the way he really was, not being an actor. I mean, this is really what he was like. And he's talking to the audience, and he's more himself, you know, rather than playing a character, I mean.
Well, naturally. To be Hungarian is not a nationality, it's a profession.
But the truth about Hungarians, which they do try to cover up, is that they're not any more crooked than the rest of us. But not the way they like to tell it. Of all the Hungarian friends I've ever had, I can't remember one who didn't want me to think of him as a king of con men. As for this Hungarian's own tales of his own lurid past, they don't, according to his biographer, jibe exactly with versions of the same events as told by certain art dealers.
I do think art dealers are...
You know, the question, this is a film about art and art forgery. The question, what is art? It's probably the most difficult question that was put forward to any human. What is the art? Myself, I did not discuss, actually. I should have, because he probably would have given me the answer. I didn't ask him, what do you think it's art? I thought I'm bright enough that I'm going to see it through the film. And obviously today when I look at the film, I see that I am not bright enough, and I did not discover what is really art. I know that it's art, what he did, but how to pinpoint it down and say, this film is an art because of this and that, it's very, very hard. But I think what I feel, if I may call myself an artist, what I myself intimately feel about art is that art is freedom. Because I think if somebody literally, physically gets me and puts me in a prison, and if they give me a piece of clay or a piece of paper with a pen, I will be free.
From a normal lower middle class home. And since then has refused.
It comes again back to the same questions. What is really the art and what is the fake? And why should something that we call the art be the truth? Isn't fake also some kind of a truth? It could be a lie is not a truth, but fake is something else. Fake is not a lie. Fake is a product of imagination, and art is product of imagination. So that I don't make a big distinction between what we call true artist and the faker. I think that they are brothers.
I said where they come from, but I didn't try to investigate too much. But I kept
Why didn't you?
Like everyone. Because they were very... I didn't want to...
You didn't want to know?
Too much. The year after, he called me, he said, I have 3 more.
Three more Modigliani.
I say, I have already 10 in my rooms. I'm a collector of Modigliani. And of course, if you had a portrait de Soutine, I love so much Soutine.
Yeah, but why did you want a portrait of Soutine?
Because I like Soutine.
I see.
And I asked to Elmire if you had one. He said, I don't have any Soutine by Modigliani. Why?
Soutine was a friend of Modigliani.
Exactly.
You asked.
During the editing of F for Fake, Orson saw that there are many things, not only so, but he saw it even before the editing, that there are many things that he needs to do himself, shoot and so on. So that actually he was going to incorporate his own film with the material of François Reichenbach. And François said, yes, I'll give you this and we'll have certain money. I'm going to get it from here and there, and Ministry of Culture and centers and the help of cinema. I don't know how these organizations are called in France. And when he got Orson on the hook, after about a week of shooting, he called us to his flat for lunch. we came there, and he said he had such a childish look on his face, and he always had that childish, slightly surprised look. He said, "You know, Orson, I'm so sorry there is no more money. You see," and he took us through his house. "You see, I was forced," and he almost broke in tears, "I was forced to sell my Matisse, and I loved my Matisse, and I sold Vertèche, and I loved Vertèche. It was my particular collection. I would treasure it. I wanted to keep it until the rest of my life." And Orson kind of believed him because, you know, Orson was very smart, but at the same time he was very naive, and you could take him on the ride just on the sentiment. Nobody would believe that from him, but he was like that. And I needed to go to the toilet. And I went through Francois's bedroom to his bathroom, and I bent to pick up this pin. And under the bed, I see Vertèches and Matisses. He was lying all the way through. He had all of those paintings. So I came back, and I said to Orson, "You know, Francois stashed all the things under the bed." And Orson said, "You know, after I was, through the lunch, I was thinking more and more, and he really didn't act all this well. I think he's cooking something." But Francois insisted that he has no money. He said, "Yes, I didn't sell Matisse and Vertèche, but I cannot do it. It's present of my father. It's a family collection. It also belongs to my brother. I cannot do it. I don't know what we are going to do." And of course, again, Orson put his own money in the film, as always. So we continued shooting.
Like to call the golden years.
A little bit of luck.
And a dash of larceny. You've been freely owning up to your own past. I better do some confessing myself. Francois was an art dealer, and I was an artist. I thought I was, anyway. Like Elmire, I too was once a hungry painter, but not here in France. No, I was hungry in Ireland. I'd come there to paint, bought a donkey and cart.
This scene was shot in a park right in the center of Paris on the right bank. Orson had me drive to this park, and I had to hike the tripod and the camera out, and he'd watch it. Then I'd go back to the car and get some more equipment and bring it out. And then he would tell me the shots he wanted, and we shot it. I think we went here twice, once on a nice day and once on a colder day. You'll see there, right there. It almost looks like it's snowing, but it's not. It's just a much colder, gloomier day with what we call French skies. So he liked these shots, and we made these wide shots right here.
Famous star from New York, and somehow got them to believe me. That's how I started. Began at the top, and have been working my way down ever since. If acting is an art, cooking up that bogus Broadway career was a fine case of art forgery.
And then back at the studio, which was his house, we did these close-ups in the garden, where we could have more control over things. And this, of course, is footage from Earth versus the Flying Saucers that he bought. You know, he paid for the rights to the stock footage. And then I had to go to some radio store in L.A. and photograph all these old radios.
On the radio, I got my first job from Paul Stewart, and we were lucky enough to have him join us later in the Mercury. Paul was a real...
This was in my house in Laurel Canyon. I still have that radio thing turning back there in that old red radio. Up there in the corner is my assistant cameraman, picture of him, Michael Stringer.
Correction, from Mars. Sorry, folks, that's what experts are saying. They are Martians.
TV would have shown us up. Half the population got the screaming jeebies just because they couldn't see how silly it all would have looked.
Well, there are several actors that Orson used in his youth, like Paul Stewart, Joseph Cotton. And I don't think that he used these people to make any kind of connection with his, for example, Citizen Kane and this last film to kind of bridge or encompass his first and, God, his last film. It was something much more simple. It was because he wanted to see them again. He wanted to be with them, and he wanted, it was not a big job, but he wanted them to work again. And I know, again, I go back to The Other Side of the Wind, when he used an Austrian actor lived in New York called Tonio Selworth, who, by the way, became my great friend, lived to be 106 years old. And he used this actor, and I said, you know, why? I was curious, you know, why are you taking that old actor? By that time, he was, I don't know, quite old. He said, you know, he was a matinee idol when I was young, and he's forgotten. And can you imagine what that would be for that man to be again in a movie business, to make a film? And he really took that man just for that reason.
First movie? Well, among the...
Richard Wilson, again, you know, he was a friend, and I didn't know very well Richard. He seemed to be a very sweet man, very nice, and Orson loved him.
But when the character was changed to the famous newspaper tycoon,
He loved Joseph Cotton. I think he was his closest friend. They were very rarely in touch, but whenever he could, whenever he was in Los Angeles, he would immediately call to see how Joe is and so on. And one day he calls me and says, you know, Thursday I'm going to have lunch with Joe. And he was all exuberant and so on, and he goes to a restaurant that doesn't exist anymore called Ma Maison on Melrose Boulevard in Los Angeles. The owner was Patrick Terrail, the nephew of the great Terrail who had Silver d'Argent in Paris and all this. So it was an in place. It was a rather long lunch. He comes 3:30, 4 o'clock back home, and it doesn't seem to me as happy as when he left. And I said, what's going on? He said, you know, Joe told me a story, and I was a little disappointed because I think he was the closest friend of mine, and this story, it didn't please me. What was it? Well, it doesn't matter what the story is. He just told me a story about myself. And I, Orson said, and I said to him, Joe, but there is not a grain of truth in this thing. And Joe, Orson says, slapped me on the shoulder and said, doesn't matter, Orson, but it makes a great story. So you see, even his closest friends would tell a story that didn't have a grain of truth, but because it made a great story, why not tell the story about Orson?
Hughes' design for a Hughes-directed hit movie was, for Memory America, the cause of a great uplift. Less uplifting was The Spruce Goose, the biggest thing with wings that ever happened. In fact,
Something funny coming up here. There's a shot coming up of Howard Hughes crossing a boat gangplank, but Orson looked at it after he bought the stock shot, and he says, do you know something funny, Gary? I said, no, what? And he says, that's not Howard Hughes. It's the actor Don Amici. I said, well, you can probably get away with it. He says, I have to. I can't change it again. He said, don't tell anybody. So I'm telling you now. No one's ever said anything.
That's part of his charm.
There it is. There's Don Amici. It's fake, Orson. He faked it.
Sometimes, anyway. Just at the end. Is he winning now? The end of this story.
I only wish I was still in the movie business.
Our semi...
This was shot in a little section of land and a street. Well, not really a street, but just to the side of Orson's house in Orvier, France, outside of our studio.
In germ-free, air-conditioned solitude.
Now, this is in Orson's backyard. Orson and Oya, who owned this house together, which is still there. And there's Oya in a black wig and a little hat, and her sister back there in a black wig. There's Chippy the dog, and then, of course, Orson. And the guy in front of him was our driver, who later became a cameraman, Oya told me. I don't remember his name exactly.
championship title.
It taxes your imagination.
That's something else Orson just popped up with. Let's go out in the garden and shoot this. One day, we were shooting F for Fake, and I was living upstairs in the house, and I came down in the morning, and Orson had all these pots and pans and dishes and everything set out in the studio. I said, "What's this for?" And he says, "The cooking show." As if I was supposed to know it. He wanted to start another project while we were doing this about gourmet cooking. We never did it, but acted like I was supposed to know what was going on.
Telling the truth, we should remember that Hughes had been known to make use of doubles. And here comes another theory. Now a double might be making use of Hughes.
According to informed sources, high officials in the Hughes Empire are not even now fully satisfied.
Now this is me, Gary Graver, acting with a high-pitched voice, the part of a newscaster, and Orson went behind the camera and photographed me, and then we put it on the moviola, and I photographed myself again.
Imprisonment. But this may be softened if Clifford Irving agrees to come clean on the whole story.
He did. He told it all, not only to the courts, but in a book. And now, as Elmire leaves that story, and a chapter in ours comes to a close, things may well...
Orson loved everything, of course, about the filmmaking. From the first idea to writing of the script. For example, I know when we would be sitting in our living room and we called this playing ping pong. We would come with an idea and he would say, for example, there is a man and two women walking on the beach. What do they say? From where they came and where do they go? Now the ball is in your court, he would say. Then I would say, he is a wife, there is a husband and wife and adopted daughter. And the adopted daughter is going to get married tomorrow and they're walking down the beach to meet the fiancé. Now up to yours. And this was a ping pong. He adored that. He loved that. And which was very nice for me was that whenever it came to a female role, if it was the one that I would eventually play or some other actress, he would let me to work for the women. And this is why I always, when I even see myself on the screen, if somebody asks me in this film that you are looking at now, why are you saying or doing this, I would refer to myself as she. And I was always in third person. It's much, much easier. Actually, I think in life, too, sometimes we should think of ourselves as he or she. Then shooting, of course, it was a lot of fun. Very difficult, but a lot of fun. And I'm going to tell you something that Orson, probably a lot of people know that, but some don't. And to the ones that don't, I will tell you what Orson said that a movie director is. He said, movie director presides over the accidents. Now, he really was presiding over the accidents. And I myself think that, among other things, Orson's greatness was that when there was an accident and he was forced to preside over it, he would use that accident to his advantage. It was not, and I worked as an actress and even myself 2 times as a movie director of my own films. You have scenes under the sun and suddenly there is cloud. Now, I get panic. Some other directors, it's a small example. It's maybe not a good example, but it's a little primitive example, or a little simple example, but you will understand. There comes a cloud, and everybody says, oh my God, and we were supposed, how many pages are going now away, how we are going to shoot this thing, and so on. And there comes the director. Big, medium, or small. The small director, in my eyes, are going to tear his hair. The medium director is going to put more light to somehow chase the shadow of the cloud. And the big director, like Orson, is going to say, but this is wonderful. It's going to change everything I thought up to now. New ideas.
really flattened out for her.
Then, finally, on a distant island, he did find a home. He doesn't own it, remember, but it's a splendid villa with a fine view of the village.
I see visually. My memory is visual also. And when I saw Orson at his editing table, and he had this big machine, big table called the Prevost, made in Italy. He brought one especially from Milan in Italy. From the back, if you look at him from the back, it looked as though he was playing a piano. And actually, when he was a child, he was going to be a pianist because his mother was a pianist, and apparently I didn't hear anything from her, but I trust him, and some other people told me that she was a great pianist and she had the Shaliapins in her house and people like that. And Orson stopped playing piano when she died. He decided to give up that. So I said to him, you know, Orson, you really, when I look at you, he said, but it is a music. Editing is a partitura. Because you can shoot a film, it's a long, it's a short, it's like this and like that. But when you come down and you must put it and give it a frame and a border and a limit, and when it goes into certain length of 1 hour and so, or 2, it's a piece of music. So I'm not looking at the pictures now only visually and the movements. It's also like a ballet. One frame must flow into the other. There are no jumps. Somebody in France later told me, and I don't know, I suppose in some other movie schools, that they are studying especially one semester editing of Orson Welles. And I think what he saw, because he loved so much editing and because he really considered that this is a finely, with all the things that you need, the script and the shooting, that this is the marrow of filmmaking, is the editing. This is why he took this film, F for Fake. Because he was going to do what he loved the most, write the music.
Jean-Pierre Aumont, I had a Spanish-Polish prince, Czartoryski Bourbon, who is a cousin germain of the next king of Spain.
Talking about the editing again, this, what I'm going to tell you, it's kind of a little anecdotal. It doesn't really have anything to do with the great art and how Orson made his film. It just, I want to, again, I'm a visual type, I just want to describe you and give you a few pictures of him as a man, physical man, in the editing room, surrounded one time, not in F for Fake, but again, I go back to the other side of the wind, by 9 editing tables. He had 9 cutters. Please forgive me, I'm talking again about the other side of the wind and not of F for Fake, but you know, if I talk about some other films, how Orson did them, what he thought then, and why he used these people and that, this person and that person, it will, I think, also help you to see better F for Fake. You will understand his ideas better, his motives, and so on.
A friend, another friend.
He stood in the middle of the room. He would look the screen, 1 up to 9, and he would say, now Jean, because it was in France that we edited. Jean, mark the shot number 3, take it out, keep it aside. You, Pierre, yeah, first shot is good. Take this out. Give it to me. Francine, yeah, that's fine. Fifth you take out. Then he goes to the rest and he says, okay, Jean-Pierre, give it to Nicole. Nicole, you put it between 11th and 12th. And you, Francine, you give it to Yvonne, and she puts it between 1st and 2nd. He had such an unbelievable computer mind. You know, of course I feel sorry that he died. Without him, my life is half what it was. But I feel sorry above all that he was not able to reach this age of computers and things. Not that he would use the Star Wars and the tricks and all. He didn't like that. because he didn't like synthesizers, he didn't like electric guitars and so on. This sound he didn't like, he would not. But he would have used that in some absolutely marvelous way that nobody probably would have done it. So he was a kind of like a Margot Fontaine. He was dancing among these 9 tables. And these poor, you know, my sister also, among other things, she was working in F for Fake, and she was also a cook and a focus puller and an electrician like all of us. But she was also an editor. She works on the Dead Reckoning, The Deep. That's where she learned to be the editor, and then she worked on the other side of the wind. And not only her, he would bring many editors to tears because he was simply much too smart for them and much too quick and had much better memory than they did. And it was tough to keep pace with him. But then, of course, when would come lunchtime, he would take everybody for the wonderful lunch, tell them that he was the most marvelous storyteller. Great stories, and everybody would forgive him. And then back again in the black hole, and that was it.
It's been standing here for centuries. The premier work of man, perhaps, in the whole Western world. And it's without a signature. Chartres.
Now, this is Chartres, the church. Orson drew all storyboards for me and sent me over. Orson had me apply a medium fog filter, cut in with the fog filter on him to give that kind of dreamy feeling and take the edge off the sharpness of things. This was shot outside the studio, and Orson knew the church. He gave me a whole list and sketches of things to shoot, and I shot it. One of my favorite sequences. See, the F for Fake has so many layers to it. And it was what do you call it? It's a freewheeling kind of essay film. You could put anything into it you wanted to. Orson got, I mean, he took it in so many different directions.
Which we choose when all our cities are dust, to stand intact. To mark where we have been, to testify to what we had it in us to accomplish. Our works.
When the film was initially released, it was not successful. It was in Europe, but not in America. It went sort of unnoticed. I went around with the picture to New York and San Francisco, Seattle, and different places, and I'd do radio interviews about the show, and we have, like in San Francisco, we had an art contest in a gallery and give free tickets to the movie, etc. But the picture just didn't go over. Only about 10 years ago, when they started running it on cable, did it catch on. And people come up to me all the time and said, I love that movie, F for Fake. But it was ahead of its time at the time. And Orson's always been that way. Kane was ahead of its time. Lady from Shanghai was ahead of its time. Macbeth was different because it was shot, long shots and done in 20 days, which Orson wanted to prove that he could do a movie, low budget and fast. Nobody paid attention to it, Macbeth, and so I think that's when he packed up his bags and left for Europe to work as an actor.
Collaboration, we offer now what you might call it a reenactment of recent history.
When I wrote the girl watching sequence, I did not have, at that time, I was not thinking of doing anything like this scene with Picasso. You see him looking through the window, and it's really looking through the window of my living room, our living room in Aurevilliers in France.
Oh, yeah.
I left Zagreb, where I studied sculpture, to continue in l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. I was just hoping that eventually I might meet Picasso. And I started thinking of how it would be meeting Picasso and so on, and it's just a little fruit of my imagination, this script. I have a boyfriend, and then I meet Picasso, and then I get the paintings, and I was really trying to make a little thriller because I was hoping that eventually I will make the film. And that time I had a French boyfriend. It wasn't Olaf. It was a French boy, very, very smart young man. And he wanted to go into movie business. And, you know, we were very young and we thought that we might come up somehow with some money and some sponsors and things like that. And he actually prompted me to start to write something. And I said, what can I write? I just came to France. I don't know, you know, I hardly know Paris and so on. But then I said again to myself, why not write about somebody who just came in Paris and doesn't know where it is and what to do and how to go about it? And this is how the Picasso sequence started.
In the Viking country. In his homeland up there in the frozen north, Olaf had been infected rather imperfectly with a taste for the classic jazz of New Orleans, and his researches in this area took place under Picasso's window, where morning and night he practiced the trombone.
Now, the Picasso sequence featuring Oya in a run-in with Picasso was all shot right around Orvilliers in a town called Houdan. After a while, I get to believe, too, that Picasso actually is in it. But, of course, they're all still pictures, and some of them touched up by Orson. A lot of them, we took books with pictures of Picasso, and I had to go into the Xerox places, blow them up, put backing on them, and hang them up, so you get the feeling that that's really Picasso. Now, Picasso was alive, and we never heard a word from him. No release, nothing, not a peep. I'm sure he was aware of this film, but it didn't seem to bother him.
Picasso either. Cocktail time, dinner time, any time.
I remember this particular sequence when you see him looking through the window behind the shutters and he flutters with his bright eyes. Of course, we didn't have Picasso. We just made an agrandissement of his photos, and I made some little retouches so that it doesn't show the background, which was a bullfight or something like that. And while we were shooting in a pose, I asked Orson, although I was hoping secretly, I was a little bit terrified because Orson had so many troubles with his films. They were stopped for different reasons, lack of money and so on and so on. And I said to myself, my God, we don't have enough money. And on top of that, if Picasso comes, like this Hurricane Ethel from Invented Toussaint, it's really going to be terrible. But secretly, I was kind of hoping, I must say, selfishly, that it will reach Picasso, because when I started writing my Picasso sequence, I wrote it because I was hoping that I'm going to meet Picasso, that eventually when I make my film, I'll somehow have a legitimate excuse to interview him and then meet him. Otherwise, how can I write him and Mr. Picasso, I admire you, I would like to see him, you know, who cares? So yes, I was very concerned. But Orson was not, obviously. He continued with the film. And I said, my God, you know. He said, you know, it's going to be just like me and Hemingway. We'll have a fight, and then we'll become greatest friends. And it's too bad. They didn't have a fight, and they didn't meet. And I really don't know if Picasso ever saw the film. He probably heard of it, but I think it was, you know, when Orson finishes the film and Orson, the great artist, bows in front of one other great artist and call him such, Picasso couldn't have been upset, and obviously he wasn't. It doesn't look as a tough scene or difficult scene, but for me, in my heart, it was very hard. When I ran in a blue whale, naked under it, running to Picasso's atelier. Because on one side, there is that, you can see the dirty wall in front of runs that nice-looking girl, healthy in her movement. Her hair is flying, it's healthy. Even the tissue has its life of its own. And on the other side, when we were shooting this thing, there was a train that was going to Lourdes. And I think that everybody knows that Lourdes is a place of pilgrimage and that a lot of sick people go there to pray for their health and so on. So on the other side, this girl in the blue, she runs, and the people, the columns of people being carried, driven, pushed, and they wait for the train to come in. And they all stay there. It's practically a movie scene. I'm now talking about like a movie maker. And they look at this life and this health and this running light. And they are all prisoners of these wheels and these pains and these incapacities. And it was the toughest scene I did in this film.
Money. We've heard Elmire on that subject. Well, Picasso didn't make all that bread by casting any crumbs of it on the waters or feeding it to the birds or giving away any pictures to his models. But Oya laid down conditions.
The American Distributor was a company based in Seattle. They owned a chain of theaters called the Seven Gables, which they had all over the Seattle area. There were also film distributors, and they took on F for Fake. They wanted a trailer. And instead of them making the trailer, Orson said, I'll make the trailer. And he proceeded to do so with me on the soundstage, and Oya, and a lot me, which I was not expecting. He didn't say, I want you to play the lead in this trailer. He just gave me stuff to do. And then he would operate the camera. After I lit the set and put the right lenses on and everything, then he would take over operating the camera, had me running around. The trailer is about 10 minutes, I think, something like that. I said to him, I said, Orson, the trailer only has to be 3 minutes. He said, no, I don't want to do that. So I want to make this, and it's all new material. Now, this has a connection or a bookend with the Citizen Kane trailer, which Orson created not as a heavy trailer for Kane, but lighthearted and fun, and the dancing girls and, you know, people talking about Kane and everything, because they were worried that the film was going to be taken as too serious and not entertaining or something. So Orson made the Kane trailer very entertaining. The same thing you want to do with that for Fake trailer. He wanted to promote it. It's more of a promo reel. But I told him from the beginning that you can't have a trailer this long, and the distributor would not cut the negative. We sent them the color print and the soundtrack. They were supposed to cut the trailer in Seattle, and they wouldn't spend the money. So it never got finished. Only thing existed was a work print, which they tore apart. And in hindsight, I wished I would have made a dupe of it, saved it, and saved the negative, or at least given us the negative back. But I was too naive then to think about preserving that. It was out of my hands anyway, and I wasn't going to spend the money to do that. So it got away. Here's an Orson Welles short film that you'd think they would want, but they didn't. They made their own trailer. So another project, not Orson's fault, was lost. But now we have it back again.
Terrible incandescence of Picasso's rage. And then there came a sudden and quite remarkable change. Those famous staring eyes now stared as eyes have never stared before.
Orson was very wounded by critics. He would lock himself in his room and not come out all day or something. And the Pauline Kael book just really made him upset that someone would tear into him like that, which was not true. Accuse him of things that he didn't do. And, of course, he wrote the screenplay to Kane. I was with him when he was writing, and I know that a lot of Kane is autobiographical with Orson. He would change things. And a lot of times when he acted in movies, he would be allowed, like in The Third Man, to write his own scenes. And they were better than what he had to say anyway. But he was very ethical. Like when he did the wine commercials, Paul Masson, they wanted him to compare their wine to a Stradivarius violin. And he said, I'm not going to do this. You know, this people believe me when I say something. I'm not going to say that. And they said, well, they agreed with him. He didn't have to do it.
Secret studio? This is true, you know. What's amazing is that he went with her.
Here's some pictures. These are the last I took of him.
The first to be made.
One afternoon, we were sitting around the fireplace in the winter at his house in Hollywood, which is a little miniature, kind of Gone with the Wind, Southern mansion type of house with the columns out front. He said, now, Gary, he said, you know, he says, I'm doing these wine commercials and you're doing these some low-budget pictures and stuff. And he says, now, we're both talented fellows, but here we are in the heart of Hollywood working in the suburbs of the cinema. I'll never forgot that.
One of which Picasso was very highly praised.
But not to put it mildly, highly pleased. You must have known you couldn't get away with it.
I got to meet Picasso.
So here they are, the world's best and least known geniuses.
My grandfather was very glad to see him.
Picasso.
Now, this is Oya's grandfather in the sequence. It's actually her father. And it was shot in 35 black and white, live action, which Orson then converted into stills. He decided not to use moving images.
A dying art forger, he said, is still an art forger.
No, you tell us what Picasso said.
He called us both a couple of crooks.
Oh, yes, that your grandfather is quite as honest as anyone that young, that beautiful, and that Hungarian has any need to be.
She's stolen my pictures, said Picasso.
She made you a gift, senor. She gave you a whole summer.
Well, you see, in this sequence, first of all, it was shot in a fog, but the fog was made again in my living room. And the background are the big canvases that I didn't use yet. They were all white. After all this tempestuous editing and shooting and images running one after the other, like I'm a girl from the Mediterranean, I'm a woman from the sea, from the Adriatic, and a lot of things that I describe, forgive me, I always compare them to something that's happening on the sea, and this film to me was like waves rushing one after the other with the foam and with the seagulls screaming, and all this film is to me like that. And then it comes this kind of total silence, like a big tempest. And then you start, although it's a foggy scene, but you start seeing kind of clearly through that fog this deep hurt of an artist. And must have been some pain in Orson himself. Not so much for himself and for his failures, because I don't think he had the failures. He had the failures that he couldn't sell the script, or a failure that he didn't have enough money, or a failure that they took away from him the magnificent Ambersons, and we all had failures and he had them. But the failure of a man who is an artist, a man of a free spirit, whose wings critics and so-called experts clip. You know, Orson himself, he was fighting gravity all his life. He was a flying bird. And this grandfather, he was maybe a smaller bird, if I can say, but he wanted to fly too. And he was flying. And then some expert comes and says, what is this little thing that you call a wing? And what is this height that you are? This is not a height. You are just a worm that crawls. What did you produce? And this is what scene is about. This scene is about a negation of capacity of so-called small people to make great things. This scene is about a snobism of proclaiming that somebody is flying higher than the other just because of who knows what, although we know what it is. And this why this scene is it's a paradox if I say that after this tempest, this is a culmination. because it's so quiet, but it is a culmination. This is what these scenes present to me.
Only to settle the fate of 22 large canvases painted by me, Picasso.
You see, this film is filled with the people who are fakers, the ones that pretend to be experts, the ones that are artists, the others that pretend to be artists. A lot of people that pretend to be something which they are not. But at the same time, if they present themselves like that, maybe they really are that. To be an artist, I think that in some respect, I'm talking from my personal feeling, I don't say that Orson or anybody else was like that, but all I can talk is, I know that I should talk about Orson, but as I told you, to me too, after all those years, he is a little bit of a rosebud, which was fascinating about him. But I think that being an artist, you must use lies. You must use tricks to come to the truth.
That's her real name, you know. Oya Koda. I don't think that young gentleman's a trombone player, but Oya's grandfather was Hungarian. Did he paint any pictures?
Never in his life.
Ladies and gentlemen, we did use Oya's
Now, this is the disappearing body. Here's another thing. I didn't know what was coming along. I had no idea. One day, Orson presented me with a ticket on an airplane to go to London. What for? He said, you got to pick up this magic trick of the floating body, you know, that disappears, a levitation gag. He says, I can only have it for 24 hours. I had to fly to London from Paris, pick up the levitation gag, bring it back, photograph it the next day, and go back to London that night and return it. So we worked all day on this sequence from morning till night.
Forging an art story. As a charlatan, of course, my job was to try to make it real. Not that reality has anything to do with it. Reality? It's the toothbrush waiting at home for you in its glass. A bus ticket, a paycheck, and the grave. In the right mood, perhaps Elmire has just as few regrets as I have to have been a charlatan. But we're not so proud, either of us, as to lay...
As you see, F for Fake is totally different than Kane or Ambersons or Lady from Shanghai or The Other Side of the Wind. It's, he didn't like to repeat himself.
Hope to serve his truth.
When you look at this film and you realize by looking at the pictures and images and also by what I said before, that it's an osmosis, it's a mixture of a work of different people, Francois and Orson, and of course myself. When I say myself, because not only that I worked in as actress and the cook and the focus puller and all this that I mentioned before, but because Girl Watching sequence and Picasso sequence was written by me. Now, in that respect, in a certain sense, I kind of behave like Orson, because I was planning to make two stories. And then I also made my own mixture. And now this mixture came into the other mixture. So it's, as Orson would say, it's a very rich soup. Let's only hope that it's digestible.
That's it?
Yeah, I think we're going
Good.
to set you free. Thank you so
Good.
much. I really appreciate it.
Orson would never say rap
Right.
on the set. He'd say freedom.